But now to the matter at hand, the Gospel of John, the first verse. Weird to read this in the middle of October, perhaps. Maybe you are more used to hearing it around Christmas time. Anybody? Right? You might hear this story. Actually, it is one of the lectionary texts that is chosen for Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, as a celebration of who? Of Jesus becoming God incarnate, God coming among us, God the divine being in our very midst, right? Emmanuel, God with us. And here the Gospel of John connects Jesus, the person Jesus, with the divine, with God. Indeed, declares that Jesus is God from the very start of it all. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then the Word came to live with us in this world. And it doesn't say his name right here, right? Well, we know who John's talking about. He goes on to talk about him a little bit later. The Word is Jesus. Jesus, God, inseparable, indeed one in the same. Jesus is God here in this gospel. But what if we look at some of the other gospel texts? Is that indeed how Jesus becomes God or Jesus becomes divine? Well, let's go back to Matthew and Luke. Again, the birth narratives that we hear around Christmas time. How does Jesus become God? How does Jesus become divine or even the Son of God? Well, through his conception, right? Through his birth. They're miraculous. There are visions, there are dreams that are had. There is even a virgin getting pregnant and giving birth to a child. Amazing, phenomenal, unheard of. Not so much. Very common way to signify that an individual was divine, had a special connection with the divine, or that person, that being would have some importance or had some importance. Let's go back, not all the way back like John, all the way back to the beginning of creation, hearkening back to Genesis, right? But at least to the conception, at least to the birth, that's where Jesus became something different, something special, something unique, someone divine. But there were folks who wrote before even Matthew and Luke. Mark, the Gospel of Mark. Does anybody remember the birth narrative from the Gospel of Mark? No, you don't, because it's not there. There isn't a birth narrative in the Gospel of Mark, but Jesus becomes the Son of God at his baptism, right? Very early in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is shown emerging from the waters, and like a dove alighting on him, and this voice coming and saying that Jesus is God's chosen one. Jesus is God's Son. As we get a little bit closer and closer to the life of Jesus, you might notice something happening. We get more and more to the human Jesus. But what about, there's somebody who wrote before Mark, Paul. Paul was his name. Some of us like to just skip over Paul because he had some seemingly nasty things to say. We can debate. We've talked a little bit before about whether that really was Paul saying those kinds of things or not. We're not going there today, but what did Paul say about Jesus' divinity? What did Paul say about Jesus being the Son of God? Well, if you read in Romans, in the 1st chapter, in the 4th verse, Jesus becomes the Son of God through his resurrection. So he's already was born, was baptized, lived, died, and then through his resurrection, now Jesus becomes one with God. all of these followers of Jesus, all of these ancestors of ours, ancestors in the faith, were trying to explain, to describe something, trying to share something about who they experienced Jesus to be, how they encountered Jesus, or how they had heard about Jesus from other people because they were not, even Paul, untimely born. They weren't direct companions of Jesus. But there was something going on, something about this human, something about this person that changed the way they connected with God, changed the way they understood the divine. There was something in that encounter and in the stories then that they heard about Jesus that shifted, that helped them to shift away from thinking of a God who lives somewhere far beyond, or maybe lives in a house, in a temple, or lives up on a mountaintop somewhere, or perhaps lives in some heaven light years away, as a song goes. But that God is right here with us. Indeed, Emmanuel, God with us. That God resides wherever we may be and connects with us deeply, personally, relationally. And helped folks to experience God in a very different way, in that God is not one who is counting how many things we do wrong, how we screw up, how we hurt one another, how we harm each other, and then punishes us, or just puts rules out there, some rules, and says, hey, you better follow these rules, or I will mete out your punishment. I will cause your suffering. Because you hear about that kind of a God in the biblical text, in the course of history, in the present day, perhaps some of us still hear about that. But in the life of Jesus, as people encountered Jesus, they encountered a divine presence, a divine experience is what they had of a God who suffers with them, who hurts with them, who mourns with them, who cries with them, who laughs with them, who celebrates with them, who is in it with us. No matter what we are experiencing, no matter what we go through, that they experience that kind of a God who seeks to offer us comfort and to show us a way forward toward justice rather than meting out so-called justice that is judgment, that is punishment, that is hurt and harm for not following these rules over here. So what indeed is this incarnation about? Is it just about Jesus? Well, for me, I do identify as a Christian. For me, Jesus is one who decisively reveals, shows forth who the divine is in those ways that I just explained about God being fully with us through all of it, who loves us, who offers us guidance, who offers us grace, who is generous with us, who invites us to love and invites us to life. So I do experience the divine as I encounter Jesus through these ancient texts. But is it just about Jesus? Well, if you follow those who proclaimed and put together the Nicene Creed, you might think it's only about Jesus and not really much about his life. He was conceived of the Virgin Mary. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. There's a comma to signify Jesus' life. That's it. And in such creeds, in those sorts of statements, it becomes about believing the right thing, agreeing with the right statement about Jesus. Even though there were folks at that time, Arius being one of them, the Arian controversy, who spoke differently and said that Jesus wasn't born divine, but Jesus became divine as he lived his life. There were those who put forward that understanding, who said it was his holy life and his good deeds. That's how we can see Jesus as having this connection with God. And indeed, some still claiming Jesus to be God, God's self. To be bringing God in flesh, right? Incarnation. But the God of God, the true God of true God, the true light of true light, the begotten but not made folks won out. And that's what we hear. That's what is proclaimed in many Christian churches today. Jesus is God. Jesus is at least the Son of God. And if you don't believe that, and if you don't believe the whole virgin birth thing, then you are not a so-called true Christian. Well, at least you're not one of those dominant Christians. Your side didn't win, okay? The way I understand things, my side didn't win if we were just on one side or the other. But is that what it's about? Is that what Jesus was about? Is that what the comma was about? AKA Jesus' life. You know, as I examine Jesus' life, as I hear about Jesus' life, whether that be what Paul was focusing on, or Mark, or Matthew, or Luke, or even John, it seems to me that Jesus was much more about how we live this life. Inviting us not to deify him, not to worship him, not to say XYZ about him, but to follow on a path, on a journey of life, and indeed to incarnate God as well. For us, through our lives, through our actions, through our words, to make the love of God, the love that is God, known in the world today. So friends, do I believe that God was incarnate in Jesus? Yeah, I do. And I look at his life, I look at how he lived in a particular time and place, and I see him as an example of how we can live most wholly and fully as human beings. Fully and wholly as the human being he was. Striving for justice. Living in solidarity with those on the margins of society. Loving the so-called unlovable. Taking time to center himself. And I understand, I experience, I hear, I perceive that he invites us on that journey. Invites us to live our lives in such a way. Not just looking at him and saying, wow, well, I'm not Jesus. No way I could do that. Well, yeah, maybe Jesus could do that, but I'm just a regular old human being. Yes, indeed you are. And to live most wholly, fully, authentically human, we become more divine as we live that, because I believe That God is calling us in each and every moment to live love. That is God's direction. That is God's intention. That is God's invitation for us in every moment. And as we live that, we live more God, we share more love, we share more divinity, and we are more fully, wholly, and authentically human. So we can't just leave it, brush it off, put it all on Jesus. We can be inspired by his life. We can seek guidance from his teachings. But we have to take our own responsibility. We are invited and we are called and we are empowered and gifted to live out beauty and joy and justice and love, friends. We are called, we are invited to become, to be moments of Emmanuel, to share God's life and God's love in each and every moment of our lives, in our spheres of the world. We are invited to be the incarnation. Not just one of us, all of us. And not just those of us who are gathered here, or the wonderful, beautiful, amazing children who are down the hallway. Not just those within this building, but throughout the world, that God is inviting each and every one of us to incarnate who God is, what God's about: love, justice, peace, joy, beauty. That's what I think about incarnation. What do you think? What do you think about Jesus, and how does that impact how you're going to live your life? You can put it all on Jesus, and then you're free to go about living your life however you like, because Jesus did it and I'm not him. Or you can take the more challenging road, I suppose, but I think the more faithful road. And to receive, and it's each and every moment, to receive that invitation, that call, to respond to the divine inviting you to share that love, to make that love real, to embody the divine whenever and wherever you are. I'm going to give you a moment to connect with God, who is indeed with you, with us. To attend to the Spirit that continues moving and inspiring in this space and in this time, just as the Spirit did way back when Jesus lived and even before that. Friends, let us be together now for a moment of reflection, of meditation, of prayer. Let us be together now for a moment of pause.